but cause for concern, absolutely.
Prime Minister, in his statement, says, I want the other ministries to monitor the situation closely. He would have kind of put together a drought reform program, a drought relief program.
Monsoon, or lack of it as the case may be, could be a trigger for worsening inflation.
India is facing a deficient monsoon once again. Some states are even facing drought-like situations, and that's brought back a familiar debate. Why does Indian agriculture remain so rain-dependent despite billions of dollars being spent on agricultural and irrigation facilities? Why are we still so dependent on the rainfall? And do we have the right kind of contingency plans in place if rainfall does fail? That's our debate as we kick off We Mean Business here today. We'll get you the latest on that situation, and we'll get you a host of views on how we can tackle the monsoon story better in the years to come. We'll be joined by guests from across the spectrum to help us understand how things are playing out. We'll be joined by Professor K.V. Thomas. Firstly, we spoke to him earlier. He's the Minister for Food and PDS, independent charge. He'll be telling us what the government's assessment of the situation is. Then we'll move into some independent analysis. We'll try and understand what the weather projections are looking like. Jatin Singh of SkyMet Weather Services will talk to us about that. We'll talk about what this could mean for the economy in a year of bad economic prospects. In any case, Jatinder Kaur, economist at HDFC Bank, will be with us. We'll talk about the broader issues facing the agricultural sector and the question of how we reduce our dependence on rainfall. Hardeep Singh, former chairman of Cargill South Asia, veteran of the agricultural sector, shares his thoughts with us, and we'll also get an industry perspective. A. Mahendran, MD of Godrej Consumer Products, talks to us about how industry takes it on the chin every time we see a poor monsoon. That's what's coming up on the show, but I want to kick it off by giving you an assessment of where things stand right now. This is the latest in terms of monsoon coverage regionally and also across the country. The biggest deficiency is unfortunately in the north, where you've got a 42% deficient monsoon until now. The west is seeing a 23% deficiency in monsoon. The south is also seeing a 23% deficiency in monsoon. The east is the only part of the country which is better off with about a 7% deficiency. Net for the entire country, it now stands at 22%, and we are now well into the third week of July. So even all of those comments suggesting that July rainfall would be critical, well, we've passed that critical point more or less. We first tried to assess the situation on the ground. Our reporters from across the country, different regions, filed these reports on what the situation is, what it means for farmers and the economy on the individual states.
The drought-like conditions in Punjab. Punjab is rain deficit by about 60%, and there are some districts, some parts of Punjab which have experienced hardly any rainfall, and they are deficit by more than 75%. It's perhaps the most difficult time for farmers here in Punjab, but now they're relying on groundwater. They're trying to pump out groundwater as much as possible, but then it's not very cheap. It's a very expensive proposition when you don't get electricity, and there's hardly any electricity which farmers are getting. So now they're using diesel generator sets to pump out groundwater, and the cost have gone up by about 5,000 to 10,000 rupees per acre. So it's going to add up into the input cost. Farmers say they haven't seen anything like this before. By July, most of the Punjab is covered, and they hardly have to use their pumping out machines to pump out groundwater. Government says they are assessing the situation, and after 1 week, they continue to assess the situation of this. And if it continues, then they may even declare drought so that the farmers can get assistance from the government. But for the moment, everybody's looking towards sky for mercy from the rain gods.
The threat of a drought looms large over parts of Uttar Pradesh as well. The state has seen about 34% deficient rainfall, and this figure stood at about 77% till the 28th of June. The state government is monitoring the situation very closely, especially in the Bundelkhand region and western parts of the state, which have received inadequate rainfall so far in this monsoon season. And the state government says it will decide perhaps by the end of this month whether it needs to declare some of the districts that fall within these regions as drought affected. The paddy crop is perhaps the worst hit because of the delay in the sowing season as a result of a delayed monsoon. And farmers will be encouraged, the government says, to cultivate cereals and pulses to make for the shortfall and to avert any sort of an agrarian crisis.
From a delay of about 1 week in the onset of monsoon back in June, what we are staring at today is a 39% shortage in rainfall as of today. In fact, Met Department officials say that though almost all areas in Kerala are covered, the shortage in rainfall varies between 35 and 45% in some areas. The Agriculture Department officials say that paddy and pepper are the main crops here in Kerala, and what they say is that we are either looking at a shortage in the output of paddy or a delay in the output of paddy crop as well. But pepper will be the most affected crop. In fact, Kerala contributes about 90% of pepper output in the country. And what we are looking at is a probable high price of pepper over the next season. Cardamom is also another key crop that's grown out of Kerala. Of course, because of this scanty rainfall, there are some flip side or benefits as well. Rubber, one of the main crops grown in Kerala and also biggest contributor to rubber in the country is Kerala. It will benefit because of the scanty rainfall, and also some vegetables and plantation crops. But in the short term, what we're looking at is a high price of these vegetables and some plantation crop as well. But people across Kerala are definitely feeling the heat. Some of the areas highly humid and very hot as well.
Comparatively speaking, the rain gods have been very kind to eastern India. The monsoon deficit in eastern India now stands at about 7% according to the Met Department, while the rest of the country is reeling from a 22% deficit. But apparently there is good news. A low pressure area is forming over northwest Bay of Bengal, Orissa and West Bengal, which will bring more rains to the area as well as central India. While the east is lucky, Assam has paid a very heavy price because of the monsoons. 128 people are dead, more than 24 lakh affected, and 19 people are still missing.
All right, so tough times across the country, barring maybe the eastern part of India. Almost all other parts are seeing deficient rainfall. Key agricultural states like Punjab are being hit quite hard as well. We had a conversation with the food minister a little bit earlier. Professor K.V. Thomas had spoken to us, and we started by asking him for an assessment of the situation at the government end.
We are in constant touch and discussion with the meteorology department. As our information on today, there will be a 23% less of the normal rain in this season. So that will affect some states like Karnataka, some part of Maharashtra, some part of Rajasthan. And it may affect the pulses production and oilseed production. But what I understood is, in the case of sugar, then wheat and paddy, that will be almost the normal production, maybe slightly less than the last year. So in the case of wheat, rice and sugar, we may not have much problem. But in the case of pulses and oilseeds, we will have the problem. And so we are checking out programs, so how to face this situation.
Since you said that the biggest hit is probably going to be on pulses and on oilseeds, and that's where we've started to see price increases already. Do you have a number, sir, in terms of how much short we could be on production compared to earlier estimates?
I'm in discussion with the Agriculture Ministry on this issue. Tomorrow I'm talking to the offices. Then only I will know the correct picture. But definitely it is much less than what we produced last year.
So before I get back to the food situation, let me just understand what different states are facing right now. So which are the states which are facing near drought-like conditions? What have you heard from the states themselves?
See, what I could understand in one of our meeting a week back, in the presence of the officers in the Ministry of Agriculture, that the food grain production may not have much problem, especially in Punjab, Haryana and Andhra. Very recently I got the information that Andhra there are some rain. So our information is that food grain production, we not much worried about that. Similarly, sugar also, last year we predicted 250 and finally it came up to 260, 262 lakh tons. So this time also the production is about 250. So I think in the case of sugar also we need not much worried. But as I said earlier, in the case of pulses and oil seeds, we have to take special cares, and we have to have some special projects so that pulses are available to the common people in this country.
All right, and you've said earlier that you would perhaps push more pulses through the PDS system, which is something which is under discussion right now. But, sir, which are the states which have drought-like conditions right now? What's sort of the picture across some of those states where rainfall has been very, very scanty?
What I understood is Karnataka is very badly affected, and some part of Maharashtra and some part of Rajasthan. These are the information I got, but tomorrow I am sitting with the officers to find out exactly what is the picture, where are the real areas and how much impact this drought will have in these areas. I am having a review meeting tomorrow.
Okay, we'll wait and see what comes out of that review meeting. So just wondering, in the interim, has there been any request of funds from states? Because that's the other thing that people are talking about, that, you do face drought-like conditions. There'll be more and more requests coming in from states to the center for special assistance. Have you got such requests?
Already there is an existing mechanism under the Ministry of Home, and Ministry of Agriculture also is there. This existing mechanism is there. Very recently in Karnataka, a team was sent to Maharashtra. It comes under the Ministry of Home and Agriculture, and they are watching the situation.
All right, sir, but is there enough money in sort of the calamity fund itself? Is that where you would take the money and give to the states, or is there, sort of an incremental demand on the central government?
There is an existing mechanism is there. Whenever there are natural calamities, some assistance is being given, and already it is in the plan budget. And when we send a new team, suppose we send a central team to assess, then that is being decided by the Ministry of Home with the assistance of the Ministry of Agriculture.
So just coming back to the food situation, are you imposing any stock holding limits? Although you said that there's no major issue with grains in particular, but sometimes it's just an issue of speculation because, the market starts speculating, traders start holding on to grain, prices shoot up. It's a vicious cycle. So to preempt that cycle, are you putting in any stock holding limits, sir?
So I am discussing this matter with the Consumer Affairs Department. We have also asked the FMC chairman to be very watchful. I will have a review within 1 or 2 days on the impact of future trade on some of the items, and if the government feels that there is a very high fluctuation because of this futures, then definitely government will take strong measures.
Okay, and on the export end, sir, any thought being given to change the export policy, wheat and sugar in particular, where exports have picked up?
Sir, now what we are exporting is sugar. We have allowed about 40 lakh tons of OGL. Roughly 20 has gone out of the country. And similarly, in the case of wheat, it is 20 lakhs under OGL and around 50-55 lakh tons of rice. As we have got a very huge stock with us to the tune of 82 million tons in the case of food grains, we need to be worried about that. But the committee has been constituted with the Commerce Secretary as the chairman to review the situation, and whenever government feels that export has to be controlled or has to be banned, at that time we will take a decision.
But as of now, there is no active consideration to actually reversing those export targets or those export sort of allowed quotas.
As we are reviewing, because every week this committee sits, review the situation regarding the export of all the exports of agriculture products. There are committees, so they are reviewing the situation, and if needs comes, then we will take whatever action is needed.
So you talked about curbs and futures trading. A lot of people argue that that's not the real problem, and if you, in an ad hoc fashion, you keep changing your policy on futures trading, then you don't allow that market to develop either. What's your thought, both near term and slightly more medium term, on your futures trading in agricultural commodities?
See, as I said earlier, we are watchful on the situations. We are not going to take hasty decisions, but if needed on future trade, if we find that future trade has got some effect on the price rise, definitely we will take action.
Okay, one last question, sir, and this is actually slightly off topic, but still relevant in the current scenario. We're moving towards a food security bill, and even when it was proposed, people talked about the hypothetical scenario where you have drought-like conditions, you have output coming down, and then you have the commitments that would be set under the food security bill. I'm just wondering, now that we are facing that situation, as we are discussing the food security bill, is the government bringing that aspect into the debate at all? Is there any change in the government stance on that bill?
See, we have got a targeted public distribution system in the country existing, and it is on now. It is as the 2000 census. So under the present TPDS system on 2000 census, what we need is about 55 million tons of food grains. And when it is 2011 census, then it becomes 60 million tons. And when the food security bill comes, it is 62. So anyhow, we are committed to the TPDS system, and we need 55 million tons. From 55 to 62, it is something manageable. This is the stand we have always taken. Because of the food security bill is coming, I don't think that this climate changes, climate impact, monsoon changes will not have much adverse effect on the implementation of the food security bill.
All right, got that, sir. Mr. Thomas, thanks so much for joining us and giving us a complete take on what the government's perspective right now on the monsoon situation is. Let me get to our panel. They've been waiting by patiently. We've got Jatin Singh of SkyMet Weather Services, Jyotinder Kaur of HDFC Bank, Hardeep Singh of Cargill South Asia, former chairman of Cargill South Asia, and A. Mahendran of GCPL. Jatin, let me just start with you very briefly. What is your assessment of what the weather situation looks like right now? And this is not the first time when we've seen the Met Department and their forecasts go completely wrong.
I'm not going to comment on the Met Department's forecast. I can tell you what we think is going to happen. Currently running at a -22, and we all need to look at 31st July very carefully, because if on the 31st of July you're at -20, then there is no doubt that this is a drought. Because in August you would need 33% excess of your usual curve to catch up with it. So I think we are more or less in a drought position. Within 5 days, we will know better. And also, I think the questions that need to be answered now is this going to be a moderate drought or is this a mega drought? When we talk, the difference between a moderate and mega drought is that a moderate drought is one standard deviation from the normal monsoon, that is within below 10%. A mega drought is a 20% deviation, 20% below. Now, 2002 and 2009 were mega droughts. 2004, for example, was a -3, so it was a manageable drought. The scenario, it seems, is that in August there's going to be somewhat of a partial revival. We think that August will be -5, July is -20, so August should be better, and September is going to be a -10. If you take these numbers, then we think that you will finish monsoon at about a -15 or a -16% below.
All right, that's still fairly large. Jyotinder, what are you building in from an economic perspective? Are you starting to look at the possibility of a drought-like situation, and then what it would imply both on the growth end and most importantly on the inflation end?
Absolutely. Like my fellow panel member just said, the question now is really about how severe the drought is. And if you just go by the direct impact of the agricultural sector on headline growth, that could shave off about 25 to 30 percentage points. So from a 6.5% growth, you could be looking at a 6.1 to 6.2% growth. And you also have the specter of food inflation. So the situation isn't looking pretty at all.
Mr. Mahendran, what are you picking up, from the people on the ground? Because, you all keep your sort of a finger on the pulse to try and understand what rural demand could shape up like. Are you all also starting to get worried? I know it hasn't showed up in individual company results, etc. But the point is that the rural economy would probably take a hit if we do see drought-like conditions.
Yes, that's the fear we have, and particularly knowing about this mega drought, etc., and the impact is going to be definitely on the consumption. And we feel that quarter 2 and quarter 3, that could be impact in consumption across the country. And that could be coming from the rural side, the rural India, the income is going to be affected. And of course, it will have an overall impact on the urban India also. So, and coupled with the fear of inflation, food inflation going up, etc. So the situation is pretty grim, yes.
Let me broaden this debate, and Mr. Singh, help us with that. Over the years, we've talked about reducing not just the dependency of agriculture on rainfall, but also the linkage between sort of rural incomes in the agricultural sector. In a situation like this, it seems like that's been only a partially successful endeavor. We haven't really gone very far. Would you say that's a fair way to put it?
India is among the most intensively irrigated nations on the planet. So to an extent, we are insulated from an aberrant monsoon, but to an extent, because a large part of India, central India, south central India is rain-fed. Maharashtra, Karnataka, as the minister said, those are areas that are largely rain-fed. If you look at it in terms of food grains, I don't think the impact is going to be substantial. In fact, if you look at northwest India, paddy transplanting is more or less complete. So we will probably have a significant rice crop and possibly an improvement in quality, because when you have a reduced moisture level in the soil, you have less pests, bolder grain. So actually rice quality may in fact improve. Coming down to central India, last couple of days we've had some rains, so you will see some, hopefully soybean will catch up. Prices are at an all-time high. They went up to almost 50,000 rupees or 51,000 rupees. They're down to 47,000 rupees now, but relate that to what it was at this time last year. It was about 25,000 rupees a ton. So we are looking at impact on oilseeds, significant impact on oilseeds, because if it does not, if this last 2 days of rainfall, we are hoping that intentions for sowing will rejuvenate and the farmer will continue to plant the planned crop of oilseeds, of soybean particularly. If that does not happen, we'll see a shift to coarse grains, and if we have an even more aberrant monsoon, then sowing intentions get impacted by a complete lack of moisture. So we are facing a drought, there is no question about it, but in India we are now largely insulated, especially in the food grain belts of northwestern India, northern India, eastern India, Andhra Pradesh, mostly irrigated. So we will see absolutely no reduction. Most of the transplanting, as I said, in rice has already happened. The bigger impact is on the recharge of the aquifer, and that is a more enduring impact. Because with this kind of an aberrant monsoon, even if it catches up in August, we will see a significant impact on the aquifer. Because don't forget, all this rice that has been transplanted from groundwater and from canals. And that has an impact on groundwater levels. That has an impact on the producibility from that land in the future. So we are facing, of course, this is a situation that is year on year in northern India, and because of the rice wheat rotation, which is unnatural, we have seen a depletion of groundwater levels year on year. In a year like this, we will see an even further impact. So that's a very serious and long-term impact on the competitiveness of Indian agriculture, on the capability of Indian agriculture in the long term. That's what worries me the most. I think short term, food grains will not get hugely impacted. Oilseeds, and as the minister said, pulses, where we are already deficit, will get impacted. Sugarcane, we will see some marginal impact, but we are in a very comfortable situation. India is produced more than it should. Actually, one of the big issues in India is that even though we are a water deficit country, one of the most water deficit countries in the world, our largest exports are in water intensive crops, like rice and sugar. Right. And that is a policy aberration which needs to be corrected. We, as a water deficit country, we should not be surplus in water intensive crops and deficit in water efficient crops like pulses and oilseeds. Okay. So that's a much larger policy initiative that the government needs to take, and it's longer term.
Okay, and I'll come back to some of those longer term issues, but just to get a sense, Jatin, the groundwater levels, do you happen to track those? At what point does that start to become a worry? Does that get compensated if rains start to pick up later in the season?
You see, groundwater level data is not as widely available as reservoir data is, but I can speculate on this, that if this turns out to be a mega drought, we don't think it's going to be, then your Rabi starts getting affected. That is basically the crossover point where rabi crops start get affected because the groundwater has not been recharged.
Jyotinder,
so anything above...
No, carry on.
So any deficit of minus 20% plus would be a problem. If it sustains that much, I don't think it will.
Jyotinder, economically, when you do see drought-like situations, what's sort of the chain of events? I mean, in this year, for instance, as Mr. Singh was also pointing out, you may not see an immediate impact on even rice and paddy. You may see some impact on pulses, but then there could be a spillover over, say, the next year as well, if there are issues like groundwater levels, etc., that start to become relevant.
That is really a question for the rabi crop. Typically, if there is enough rainfall the following year, agricultural production does rebound quite sharply. In terms of the impact, while the direct impact has been reduced quite significantly over the years, we need to understand that we are at a position where we can't afford even a single dent on any of the sectors in the economy. When you have a projection, a growth projection of 6.5%, and the prospect of that being reduced to 6.2%, you must realize that the spillover effects to industry and services is likely to be pretty intensive. In past years, the industrial and services sector have been fairly strong and have somewhat offset the drag from agriculture. This year, unfortunately, we don't have that comfort. So it's really the whole picture that we need to consider. Without those cushions coming in from industry and services, how much will agriculture really hurt? And that's really the question.
Mr. Mahendran, that's a very fair point to make. You've anyway got a weak scenario. On top of that, the rural demand segment or the consumer demand segment, which was more or less holding up, you get a bad monsoon, that will also start to crack. But, my wider question still remains the one that I was asking Mr. Singh. Has the dependency of rural incomes on agriculture gone down at all? In the years that NREGA was launched, there was talk that, yes, there is slightly less dependency. The volatility linked to monsoons has come down. But then again, now recently, people are saying that that benefit is more or less sort of played out.
Yeah, I would agree. As far as that benefit has been played out now, and our fear is the rural consumption will come down because of the rural income and the economy affecting, because of the mega drought which now being predicted, and it's also going. And certainly our fear is the consumption will be affected in the next 2 quarters. And of course, now we are hearing about the fear of rabi crop also. If that also gets affected, then it's going to be still worse situation. Yes.
Mr. Mahendran, just staying with you. So, from your perspective, from the industry's perspective, what ends up being more of a problem? Just the reduction in incomes, or also sort of the spiraling effect it has on the inflation scenario? Because that also then starts to bite in as a second round impact, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said earlier, the inflation definitely, if it shoots up, that also affects the consumption, certainly, yes. It will have a spiraling effect, and it's going to affect us that. The third one is the rupee depreciation. I feel that the imports goes up. Suppose the rabi also fails, and India is forced to also look at, particularly on the impulses as well, as the oil seeds, etc. The import situation worsens, the rupee depreciation will be still further worsened. That's another fear we have.
All right, that's a larger fear. Mr. Singh, coming back to you, that's the point that I was making earlier. I understand that, we have good food stocks, etc. But yet there is a lot of volatility that remains attached to the monsoon. And I guess my question simply was, why is that? Because budget after budget, we allocate funds for irrigation facilities. We allocate, schemes like NREGA, which are supposed to reduce dependence on agricultural income. You're a veteran of the sector. It's that aspect that I wanted your thoughts on, and whether we've succeeded in that endeavor, so to speak.
I think in agriculture, our investments have been somewhat skewed. Investments have not been towards capacity building. Investments have not been in infrastructure. Investments have been on subsidies, principally in fertilizer, which is today a huge number. Those subsidies do not create long-term competitive capability. Those are SOPs for the short term. One of the panelists spoke about, two of the panelists spoke about the impact on Rabi, and I would suggest that the impact of the damage to the aquifer goes much beyond the subsequent crop. If you look at irrigation in India, the fact of India being so substantially irrigated, much more irrigated than all of the Americas, which have maybe 50 times more water endowment than we have, the fact of this irrigation does not come without a cost, because this is substantially groundwater irrigation, and groundwater irrigation depletes the aquifer. If you look at northwestern India, if you look at the Indo-Gangetic plain, the entire Gangetic plain has seen a depletion in the aquifer of almost a foot a year in the rice areas. Now that is enduring, that is a long-term damage to growing conditions, a long-term damage to the land. It impacts the capability of that land for a very, very long period. And that is something we should not lose sight of, that you can irrigate. In agriculture in India is resilient in the short term, but in the long term, we have a much larger issue. We have a larger issue of policy. We have a larger issue of a lack of serious debate, a lack of intent. We've got subsidies that are misdirected, that are indirect. Fertilizer subsidies, largely an industry subsidy. Farmers don't really, and I'll go as long as to say there may be a huge debate in Parliament, but the cost of fertilizer, the subsidy that we pay today is so huge. A large part of it is indirect, and of course indirect subsidies do not, I don't need to talk about it, indirect subsidies do not benefit the beneficiary, the intended beneficiary, as much as we feel they do, and there's lots of data on that. And because of this large expenditure, investment in agriculture has suffered. Investment in infrastructure, investment in genetics, investment in creating marketing capabilities, transportation capabilities, logistics, all of that has suffered. And therefore, while we've irrigated, it's at a cost. And we are resilient in the short term. This season will be over, we'll get some rain in August, and we'll forget about what happened in July, and we'll be off your channels. But the news of the death of Indian agriculture is exaggerated at this point in time, but in the long term may not be as exaggerated as we believe it is. We are facing a very serious long-term issue with agriculture, and that needs policy measures. That does not need short-term SOPs and, are we going to be all right tomorrow?
Okay, and I promise to come back.
Rabi. It's much longer than that.
And I promise to pick up on that debate in just a little while. I want to pick up on that aquifer issue that you were talking about, and let me see if Jatin has a thought on that. Jatin, some of these longer-term implications, of irrigation, ironically, have you been studying those? Have you been reading about those and how those could play out on the agriculture sector?
You see, we are a weather forecasting company. We understand weather. So let me look at this problem for the weather side.
Okay.
You see, 2002 drought, 2004 drought, 2009 drought. It seems that 2012 will also be a drought. So effectively, every 3 to 4 years, you're actually getting a drought. Now, is this impact of climate change? Maybe, maybe not. But when droughts happen, you get 20 years of droughts. These are decadal cycles. The projections are that if you look at just pure statistics, this drought phase should last, the cyclical droughts should last till about 2020. If you look at the dynamical models, that are long-term climate pattern models, they're looking at more drought-like cycles till 2040. So either way, between 2012 and 2020, you're looking at, if I just distribute the maths, at least 2 more droughts. Now, I'm not sure if, we have the numbers to even understand the impact of such high frequency of droughts. Whenever you've had these kind of droughts before, you were not supporting such a large population. You were not supporting such a sophisticated economy with multiple linkages. So I think that is something that policymakers as well as businesses need to compute in any calculation.
Well, that's very interesting data, and if you combine that with Mr. Singh's comments, then it definitely gives you enough reason to worry. I'm just going to take a very quick break, and on the other side, we'll try and talk about what needs to be done. Today we're facing a situation, we're reacting to it, but how do we be less reactive and more proactive on agriculture? We'll try and get some thoughts on that. Back in a minute.
always have to be worried about the food situation. I don't see alarm bells ringing, but cause for concern, absolutely.
Prime Minister, in his statement, says, I want the other ministries to monitor the situation closely. He would have kind of put together a drought reform program, a drought relief program.
Monsoon, or lack of it as the case may be, could be a trigger for worsening inflation.
Welcome back. You're watching We Mean Business, and we are discussing the current monsoon scenario that we're facing, the prospect of a drought and the impact that would have on the agriculture sector and, of course, also the broader economy. We were talking earlier about some of the shorter-term issues, and then Mr. Singh brought up longer-term concerns, whether we are targeting our policies right, perhaps is a question worth asking. So let me go across and start with Mr. Mahendran on this segment. Mr. Mahendran, you followed the agricultural sector for a while just because it links so directly into your business. What is your broader impression on whether we've been following the right kind of policies, whether it's on irrigation or whether it's on storage, whether it's on, even say trading of food commodities? Are there some obvious issues to your mind that need to be addressed right now?
Now, as I've been following this particular sector, that the policies, particularly the government policies, needs a complete revamp and look at it more proactively, not reactively. But I'm not seeing that from a government perspective. It's always reactive and not proactive. Now, if we can look at in each and every aspect of this agricultural, the economy, the rural economy, etc., we are very, very reactive. Particularly if you look at from a reform angle, so many reforms are pending for the last 2 years, 3 years. And I'm not sure whether when we can see the daylight of that. The current political scenario, etc., one is not sure about that. For example, the GST introduction again is kept pending for a long time, and it certainly is going to help the economy in general. But there is also a complete lack of push from the government and speed actually in the reforms particularly. So we are not, from the industry point of view, the kind of speed in which the government should act, it is not being done. And more so, if you look at those reforms, can have an impact on the rural economy much deeper and much graver. Now, added to that, we have the natural calamities like drought, etc., etc.
Mr. Singh, more specific to agriculture, what to your mind are some of the priorities right now? You were talking about some long-term issues that you think need to be addressed or policies that need to be adjusted here or there. What to your mind are some of the priorities right now?
So I talked about the fact that if you are an agriculturally deficit country, which we are, then you need to be deficit in crops that are water intensive, because you're also water deficit. India is among the most water deficit countries in the world and also among the most heavily irrigated. So that's the paradigm. You're the most heavily irrigated and you have among the lowest natural endowments of water. Look at what's happening in northwest India today because of the support pricing regime and because of the unnatural rice cultivation in northern India. If you fly over northwest India, northern India today, you will see a sea of water. It hasn't rained, but you will see a sea of water. That is transplanted rice. So that's water that has been drawn from the ground, and it's all already transplanted in northwest India and will very soon be transplanted in almost all of northern India, because in UP also most of the transplanting will take place during the next 5-10 days. It will be more or less complete. So now we are seeing a situation when the rains do come, it will rain on a sea of water. When it rains on a sea of water, you do not get seepage, you do not get recharge, you get runoff. And that is the huge issue. Because we are supporting rice cultivation in northwestern India to export rice for some ridiculous reason, we have created this artificial situation where we are creating a long-term desert in our most productive soils. That's the big issue. The second big issue is fertilizer subsidies. Our fertilizer subsidy today may well be reached beyond the defense budget. compounded by we don't have any phosphate in the country, we don't have any potash, all of it is imported in one form or the other. That import, and of course phosphate and potash were both decontrolled in 1996, but of course they were not decontrolled because government continues to control the pricing. Almost 70% subsidy continues to prevail in both these items, which are entirely imported. When it's imported, one is the impact of the dollar, second is the impact of rising prices of the commodity itself globally, because these are minerals. And you are seeing now that the subsidy that we will pay on fertilizer in this country this year may well cross the defense budget, which is huge. So I'm not going to scare you with numbers, I'll just scare you with that one thought, that it's a very, very large number. Had that amount been spent on capacity building in agriculture, on infrastructure creation in agriculture, rather than a short-term SOP which buys votes, we would have created a much better capability for the long term in agriculture, and our competitiveness regionally and internationally in the long term would have been much, much better. Right. So those are the two big issues, big thoughts I'll leave you with. Okay. One is, should we be surplus in rice? Should we be surplus in the second most water-intensive crop, which is sugarcane, which is more political, and all of you know why sugarcane is political. It's because of the industry agriculture nexus. Any crop that has that kind of nexus is necessarily politicized, and therefore we have this huge surplus in sugar. We have this huge surplus in rice, right, in a country that does not have water, and these are the most water-intensive crops. Right. So it's class 2 logic that is a skewed policy in agriculture. So we can continue to have these debates, but right, those are the most substantive points that we need to, and we'll go past this drought. Food grain production this year will not suffer. We will have a fairly normal kharif production in rice. It may go down by 5 or 6%. Largely because of the rain-fed areas, but in the irrigated areas in northern India, where now when the rain comes it's going to fall in a sea of water, we are facing the damage to the aquifer because there's going to be no recharge. And that happens year on year. Even in years when you do have a normal monsoon, you have the same situation because paddy is transplanted way too early. And farmers will not go away from rice cultivation in northwest India because it is supported by government. Absolutely. By the support pricing regime.
Let me actually bring Jyotinder in on that, because Jyotinder, there's another angle to that particular story which we are seeing playing out. Because there are these artificial incentives on grain, particularly recent wheat and rice, you're seeing inadequate, say, production of pulses, for instance, which are not being incentivized adequately. So there is another sort of angle to that skew on the agricultural output side.
No, that is absolutely correct, and we have been seeing the upshot of that policy. Pulses and oilseed prices have been moving up steadily. The fact is that, even if you look at the minimum support price window, farmers are not particularly incentivized even to sell to the government. They just don't get a good enough price. They just don't see a good enough reason. They get a better price in planting rice and wheat. So at the end of the day, if you look at the consumption basket, it doesn't really comprise of rice and wheat. And what you have, you end up with is a food price spiral, despite fairly strong production in select crops.
Mr. Mahendran, you're probably seeing the impact of that as well, because the MSPs keep getting hiked. That at some point starts to feed into inflation, and then, as Jyotinder was saying, it's sort of a vicious cycle from there on. It also probably impacts some inputs of yours, or maybe not yours, but the FMCG sector, those who use oilseeds, etc. There would be an impact on them on the input side as well.
Yeah, the input cost will go up certainly. Particularly those sectors which are using, the oil seeds, etc., and pulses, which is basic raw material, and consumption it will affect the overall pricing of those products, which is relying on oil seeds and pulses. So I do see an impact, and as we have heard that this lopsided policies, etc., which has been going on for quite some time. So the government should step in and do some correction, at least for the future.
The other point Mr. Singh raised, and that's again a valid point, is, you have limited resources, and where do you direct those resources? You keep directing them towards fertilizer subsidies. You probably get far less benefit, Jyotinder, than if you had, say, directed them into other aspects of agriculture, the supply chain, or investments in the broader space that may be needed. So again, that's something in a longer term basis that is continuing to skew the sector a bit.
I think that is definitely a factor. At the end of the day, you need to be investing in supply management, you need to be investing in logistics, you need to be investing in irrigation, and that is not happening. This entire drought debate has been focused and has been looked at from the producer's side. And it's important to also look at it from the consumer's side. And that's where the public distribution system and the food security management in the country really comes into focus. Why are we not being able to mobilize large food stocks across the country to iron out price fluctuations? And these are the issues that need to be looked at. A drought is really not going to be impacting producers only. It's going to be consumers as well. And measures need to be taken accordingly.
Mr. Singh, the PDS system, the lacuna in the PDS system, and also other issues like, if there is a problem, do you need to impose stock holding limits? When do you do it? How do you do it in a manner that you don't disrupt the market? All of these issues, also become more and more relevant every time you face a situation like this, sir?
I think those are largely knee-jerk reactions. When you have a problem because of a lack of clear policy and a policy vacuum, then you blame someone else, and then you have stock limits, and then you have this strange debate that you're going to stop commodity risk management. When you say you're going to stop a capability of the producer and the purchaser to risk manage their crops, which is essentially forward markets, what you're saying is everybody is going to be a flat price operator, everybody is going to be a speculator, because you will not be able to risk manage your commodity. So those are knee-jerk reactions. That's basically to mollify the uneducated mass. Our larger issue is that we do not have a coherent policy in agriculture. We do not have a situation where we are seeing clear. If you look at the various crops, the only crop where we have had a step gain in productivity in the last decade, the only major crop has been cotton, and that has been entirely due to private sector initiative, nothing to do with government. It's because of the introduction of BT cotton. India has been among the most rapid introducers of BT cotton. I think more than 90% of cotton in India today is BT cotton. So people who say that the Indian farmer is slow to adopt new technology are dead wrong. The rate of introduction of BT cotton in India has been the fastest in the world, and that is what has increased cotton production in India. There is no other crop that has seen substantial improvement in germplasm after the green revolution of the 60s, which was dwarf wheat. And that was also because of foreign intervention. Much as our scientists like to claim that internally, but it was because of dwarf wheat coming from Mexico. Now, we have no, and so when we talk of logistics, etc., that's part of it. But the bigger issue is germplasm. The bigger issue is, do we have the genetic capability? Are we building that infrastructure? Are we building that capability within India? Are we investing towards, look at Israel, look at some of the countries, what they've done in both producibility of crops, in infrastructure, and those are countries that are not endowed with enough water. Look at South America, entirely rain-fed, right. Almost entirely rain-fed, and they are feeding most of the world today. The surpluses, and I'm not talking about what goes into the domestic consumption, but if you look at the surpluses, the largest surpluses in the world are now coming out of the largest growth in surpluses, right, is out of South America. So that's where you're seeing a step change, and we are not seeing that in India because we're looking at short-term SOPs. We're looking at subsidies in fertilizer. We're looking at subsidies in distribution, which are only short-term SOPs. That only gives you succor in the short term. Let me stay with fertilizer for a second, if you will give me half a minute.
Right, sir.
The cost of fertilizer, even to the most intensive farmer, is not more than 35% or 30% of his input cost. Let's be generous. Let's say it's 40% of his input cost. Input cost is not more than 50% of output cost. So the cost of fertilizer is in any case not more than 20% of output costs. When output costs have gone up, when output realization has gone up by more than 50%, is there not a case to take up fertilizer prices by at least 20%? If you take up fertilizer prices by 20%, that is a 4% impact on output costs. That's nothing. Output costs have gone up by 100% in some cases. So government needs to think about that, whether it's politically sustainable, whether you lose an election in one state or the other because of the nexus between industry and the parliament. That's a much larger debate. But when you increase fertilizer prices by 5%, you will see an uproar by a largely uninformed public. It does not really, and I'm a farmer, it does not really impact farmers to the extent that we think it does.
Right.
A lot of this subsidy, or the bulk of this subsidy, is indirect, and this can be used for capacity creation.
I'm sure nobody will argue with that. But
I'm not only hammering down on fertilizer. I'm talking about the whole policy. I'm talking about the whole policy framework.
True. Jyotinder, quick reaction on the fertilizer end. I don't think anybody can argue that we need to cut down on fertilizer subsidy. I think economists have been saying that for a while. Unfortunately, in India, we are having trouble cutting down on subsidy on anything. So fertilizer probably a long shot.
Yes, the problem really is the way in which the subsidy mechanism is structured and the degree of decontrol. The entire concept of direct transfers is being explored, and that is likely to be far more efficient than the current framework. Apart from that, you still have urea substantially underpriced. You have potassium and phosphorus based fertilizers overpriced, and the so-called balanced nutrient mix that the new fertilizer policy was supposed to promote is not really happening. So, apart from the level of fertilizer subsidies, it's also the way in which it is structured, the way in which it is actually dealt out.
All right, so there are lots of issues there, some of them complex, others that can be tackled but are not being tackled. I'm more or less out of time, but I want to end with Jatin. Jatin, we sort of started with you getting your projections, and this time I'm going to sort of bring it back to that. For those of us who are still waiting for some relief from the hot weather, we're waiting for some amount of rain. There is still hope, but you're saying that on a macro scale, some amount of the damage has more or less been done.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's minus 22. Right now, and even if August and September are normal, you will still finish at a minus 13. So I think, a drought is more or less here. We need to, in the next 5 days, to come to a complete conclusion for that. I would also like to add that one of the things that could be done is, which is generally missed, is El Nino indexing of the Indian agriculture, because 60% of all droughts are El Nino droughts. 2003, 2002, 2004, 2009, and if 2012 are all El Nino years. And that would give the government, the policymakers, about 5-6 months to really work things around before it strikes. Because I find it strange that despite having all the technology and know-how, we're coming to these conclusions in July. Maybe we could have started working and anticipating things in April.
So did you do that in your own weather forecasting outfit? Did you get a sense that this was going to come before the Met Department did? And I'm coming back to the first question I asked you, which you didn't answer.
You see, there are various schools of thought. We are great believers in just one parameter. Now, a lot of people will say that it is inconsistent, it doesn't already work. Find me a parameter that is as consistent as the El Nino. You will not find any. Our first forecast in May was a 60-40 with 60% normal, 40% below normal. Where 40% below normal is quite a high chance. And there was also a 20% chance of drought. In June, we switched to 60% below normal and 40% normal. So, there is enough time. A lot of validation work needs to be done to come to that conclusion, and that would give at least 3 to 4 months of time to work around things.
All right, so from the inaccurate, often inaccurate Met forecasts all the way down to the agricultural policies, there's lots to ponder on. Now, we are completely out of time, but thanks so much for watching. I want to thank our panelists for joining us, helping us try to understand the situation and the implications for India. But for now, for We Mean Business, that's all the time we have. Goodbye.